This week on the Men at the Movies podcast, we conclude our 3-week Who Am I series with Chariots of Fire. We compare the source of identity between Abrams, who sought greatness through running, and Little, who measured greatness through following God. We must find our contentment outside of ourselves and our circumstances so that win or lose, we know who we are and can experience God's smile on our lives. Lace 'em up and let's discover God's truth in this movie.
The movies and stories we love are gateways to see ourselves and God in new ways.
Every great story borrows its power from a larger story, the story that's written on our hearts and woven into the fabric of our very being. Hello and welcome to the Men at the Movies podcast. My name is Paul McDonald, and joining me via the Zoom is my buddy Britt. How you doing, man?
Doing well. This is one of my favorite movies of all time. I'm pumped. I'm ready. Let's do it.
And so we're gonna jump right in because, like Britt said, it is one of his favorite movies, and we don't want this to be a 3.5 hour 4-part. It's a mini series, right? I did want to give a little context. You know, we frequently start with why did we pick this movie? And on the one hand, it's a pretty simple explanation of, we talked about it a little bit on our last podcast. We said, hey, let's go all in on the Chariots of Fire. But on the other, it's this 3-movie series that we sort of stumbled into. And with the first one, we've got Ford versus Ferrari, where the narrator says that when you get to 7,000 RPM, the question becomes, who are you? And a lot of that question of who are you? And then we dug into The Weight of Gold and Michael Phelps. Again, the narrator said, who am I outside of the pool? And so this is sort of the natural summation, especially when we start getting into this movie, between the two main characters of Harold Abrams and Eric Little, that who are they? And what we see is two men who are sort of acting that out in two different ways.
Yeah, and it was important to get back to the 80s, I felt it was important to get back.
Yes.
To the 80s. No.
We've gone long enough without an 80s movie. We need to get back.
We need to get back. Was it 80? This was like
1981.
81. No, but this movie is one of the best movies ever made. Like I know I have said it's one of my favorite movies. At the same time, it is at least in the list of top 20 to 50 movies of all time. Like, this won an Academy Award. I mean, top level acting, directing, writing. The theme is iconic. And of course, for those of us who were in church and that whole church subculture, evangelical at the time, the message was very important to us at the time, because it had a lot of very sort of Jesus Christ Christian themes to it. Yeah. Although we can talk about how valid some of it is, but at the same time, it was very important to us. But I think this movie does a phenomenal job as a contrast between these two characters and how they either had to explore or discover their identity in real life, in a real life important situation. And it does connect back to the Olympics, like we said, but I think there's a lot of value for us to explore how these two men, one who knew his identity and one who thought he knew his identity,
right,
and how they had to approach conflict, how they had to approach the people around them that they loved, and the world around them, and those different sort of elements. So I think it's going to be very good for us to kind of explore it.
And so, as with any good British-based film, so we're going to start as they do with the headmaster speech at Key's College, which is part of Cambridge. And you've got these new students, and it's 1919, so fresh off of World War I.
Yeah.
And it starts with this war list, and he talks about the war list that he sees because the war list is the students who went to war and aren't coming back. And so as the charge to the freshmen, he gives them something to aspire to.
I take the war list and I run down it. Name after name which I cannot read and which we, who are older than you, cannot hear without emotion. Names which will be only names to you, the new college, but which to us summon up face after face, full of honesty and goodness, zeal and vigor and intellectual promise. The flower of a generation, the glory of England, and they died for England and all that England stands for. And now, by tragic necessity, their dreams have become yours. Let me exhort you. Examine yourselves. Let each of you discover where your true chance of greatness lies. For their sakes, for the sake of your college and your country, seize this chance, rejoice in it, and let no power or persuasion deter you in your task.
And then he waved his hands and food magically appeared on the tables. No, that's Hogwarts. My bad.
Right. The headless guy was walking around.
And really the whole, that was like a minute and a half or something. The whole scene really was just to set up the last 10 or 15 seconds. The charge of see where your true chance of greatness lies. Seize it and let no power or persuasion keep you from it. And that's really sets the tone for the movie.
Yeah.
Because you see that in both men, in both Eric Liddell and Harold Abrams.
Yeah. So just so people realize, this is based on a true story.
Right.
So both of these men existed and they did a lot of research. The way, I forget the actor's name, the way the actor portrays Eric Liddell when he runs is famously how Eric Liddell did run, with his arms flailing like some sort of wild man. He had like no form. And yet because he ran the way that he did, Harold at one point says, he unnerves me. Like there's something about him I can't explain. And so these two men existed. And it's a good point about coming back from World War I that, 1919, 1920, the world was in a severely depressed state. Yep. Like this was not abnormal to be sitting somewhere. By the way,
just coming off a pandemic.
It was not abnormal to look around and see literally most of the males from a certain age range gone. Just gone. And
entire classes
gone, or most of them. And, very similar to some things that happened in World War II. But in World War I, there wasn't a real reason for the war. Like you couldn't point to like Hitler was a villain or the Holocaust, or you couldn't point to those things. And at some point, even though the Allies or whoever won, what did they win? Right. Europe is in shambles. Men are coming back. The trench warfare was harrowing and just completely traumatic and hopeless. And all of these things to say. So you had this whole generation and culture trying to react to what do we do? And this man dignifies that, whoever he was, the president or dean or whoever he is. And he dignifies it and then gives them a challenge. We need you now. We need you. We need you to kind of take up where these men haven't been able to. And it's tragic. And so that's a big part of this movie too, that maybe a lot of people don't understand is that they needed those Olympics in 1924. They needed something inspiring to happen in 1924. And so these stories of these men and what they had to go through and celebrating that sort of journey for each of them is a big part of that.
And I thought it was interesting that he mentioned these names are only names to you.
Right.
But to us, these are people. They knew them.
Yeah.
It wasn't just names on a board. Like I think about you go to the war memorials and stuff and you see the lists of names, and it's very easy to be disconnected from that and just see the names. But when you realize that each name was a story, each name was a person, a body on a battlefield somewhere.
Yep.
That's when that sort of thinking can sort of overwhelm you. And you do need, in a way, that was their chance of greatness, was going to die defending their country. So what do I do? And a lot of young men felt like that. Even Abrams came back, and he had been in the army, but hadn't gone to France, hadn't gone to the trenches, hadn't gone to the front. So there's this sense of, well, the war is over. I've lost my chance at greatness, which is sort of a weird thing to be like, oh, but that's young men back then. That's how they thought. Yeah. World War II would come around, and that's how they felt. Of, I need to go prove myself.
Yep.
And so in the absence of being able to prove themselves on the battlefield, Abrams goes to prove himself on the athletic field.
Yeah.
He does the dash. He's what was it? They said, I doubt if there's a swifter man in the kingdom. They talk about him. He does something that's never been done. He runs around the courtyard in Cambridge under 12 bells for the 12 o'clock chimes, and contrast that to Eric Liddell, who we flip over to see up in Scotland. And he's running. His dad was a missionary. I don't know why you'd like him, Britt. Mr. Missionary. So his dad was a missionary, and so he feels called to go to China, but yet there's somebody else saying, hey, there's an opportunity. You can race, you can run, you still have to study and get your degree. So while you're doing that, preach and share the gospel, but also do this running because it's a gift.
You're a very lucky young man, Eric. You're the proud possessor of many gifts, and it's your sacred duty to put them to good use.
That's right. Run like we know you can, strong and true. And the mission cannot but gain by your success. What we need now is a muscular Christian to make folks sit up and notice.
How good are you, Eric?
Sandy reckons he'll run for Scotland before the month's out. And after that, the sky's the limit.
Meaning what?
The Olympic Games, maybe?
Eric, you can praise the Lord by peeling a spud if you peel it to perfection. Don't compromise. Compromise is our language of the devil. Run in God's name and let the world stand back in wonder.
So that question comes up. I love that, the sacred duty to put them to good use. It brings to mind the parable of the talents. God's given us gifts. He's given us talents, and it's our duty to use them. And I also thought that, how good are you? Well, he knows he's fast, but it takes somebody else to say, he's fast. He's probably going to end up in the Olympics.
Well, so his background was in rugby, I believe.
Yeah.
Right? His background was in rugby. So he wasn't first a runner.
Yeah.
He was first a warrior. Like if you've never played rugby.
Especially back in the early 1900s, when there was basically no safety concerns at all.
Like, they played rugby when I was in Korea. And this one time, this guy played rugby. He was in the military, and he went on base and he played rugby in the afternoon, Sunday afternoon, left church, went to play rugby, came back Sunday night. And one side of his face was higher than the other and swollen. And we were like, dude, what happened? He goes, oh, I got hit in rugby. And I said, you need to go to the hospital. Like, literally, like, there was like a crowd of people around him, like, dude, go to the hospital. Go. No, it's a rough game. And my point is that they kind of make Little out to be this very gentle soul, and he probably was. But you get this idea that he's a little bit of a warrior too. He's a little bit of he'll stand for what he believes in, and he'll fight for things that he believes in. And so that's his background. And another thing to point out that I think is an interesting dynamic is that Abraham's is Jewish. Mm-hmm. And so there's this conflict, which I think is a really interesting dynamic in the two opposites, in a sense, that they chose, because Abraham's is in conflict with a fairly Christian world. I mean, he's in conflict with a very Christianized, quote unquote, I don't know if I would say it's Christianized in reality, but the religious part of it was, right? There was a very religious Christianized world that he felt would lead him to water and not let him drink. So right. he felt he always had to be on guard. He always had to be on the defense. He always had to fight for every inch that he had. His father had to fight for every inch that he had, and he loved his father, and he looked up to his father, and his brother's a doctor. And so there's this thing that hangs over him. And Sybil asks him at one point, she says, "Do you love running?" And I wrote it down. He says, it's an ache, a helplessness. It's an anger. It's a need. I'm going to take them on, he says. And this is to Monty. He goes, I'm going to take them on one by one. This is how I fight. So for Abraham's, how he was running was how he was fighting the world. Yeah. And that can only take you so far. And I'm just going to say that outright. I know they explore his character and it's kind of interesting, but that can only take you so far. And that's his journey in the movie. His journey in the movie is realizing that sort of fighting from anger can only take you so far. Like that really can't give you a life. And he kind of has to realize that. Whereas Little, on the other hand, is a Christian, but totally welcomes him and is totally gentle with him and totally treats him like an equal. And so it's this interesting dynamic within the movie that, again, Abraham's feels like I got to prove myself worthy to this Christian world. And yet the main Christian preaching guy in the movie is like, hey man, I wish you all your success. Like he's so gentle and kind. I just love that dynamic that's going on in the movie where Abraham's had to realize some of that stuff and deal with it.
So the movie takes them on a collision course where they, of course, will race each other. And as you mentioned, before the race, they're getting ready. Little goes over to Abrams and says, "Best of success to you." And Abrams responds, "May the best man win." Oh. Which is, it's the almost the movie in a nutshell, right?
It is. It's their characters in a nutshell. Which is great writing, by the way. If you can, if you can summarize a whole character in one line that they say, that is genius writing. Okay, go ahead. That's my little 2 cents right there.
No, it's good because you've got Eric who runs for the glory because he feels God's pleasure, and we're going to play that clip here in a little bit. But then you've got Abrams who's running to prove himself, running to prove that everyone is wrong about him, running to prove that he belongs. Mm. And again, as you've said, and as we'll find through this movie, that drive, that motivation will ultimately leave you empty. So in this race, they face off and Abrams loses. I'm not sure if this is true, but they paint it as if this is the first time he has ever lost. And after the race, he's sitting there in an empty arena, and Sybil, his girlfriend, is with him, and he's sitting there and just going over the race again and again, just like, I lost. And what does that mean about me? And how am I going to respond? And Sybil's there and she basically says, you need to grow up.
He was ahead. There was nothing you could have done. He won fair and square.
Well, that's that, Abrahams.
Well, if you can't take a beating, perhaps it's for the best.
I don't run to take beatings. I run to win. If I can't win, I won't run.
If you don't run, you can't win.
I just don't know what to do.
Try growing up. You're a great man. You ran like a god. I was proud of you. Don't make me ashamed.
It's not the losing, Sib. Eric Little's a fine man and a fine runner. It's me. And after all that work, now God knows, what do I aim for?
Beating him the next time.
Sybil, I can't run any faster.
Oh, Mr. Abrams! Mr. Abrams! I can find you another 2 yards.
So the voice at the end was Sam, who would become his coach. So he's one of the best coaches in Great Britain. He's asked him to watch him. He said, I'll take a look at you, and if I think I can help you, I'll help you. So in that moment, I thought it was interesting, that shift in the middle of the conversation. And in the movie, Sybil actually leaves and then comes back to say, you're a great man. You ran like a god. I was proud of you. Don't make me ashamed.
Mm.
But you could grow up. And he even says it's not about little. I'm sure he's fine. But what does losing say about me? And he's lost. Not just lost the race, but lost his identity.
Thank you. I literally wrote down he's lost. not that he did lose, but he's lost. Because again, his identity was in the winning.
Right.
And this is what we went over with Ford versus Ferrari. Attaining the perfect lap or whatever, like racing the perfect lap. That's what, Bert guy was after. Yes, I call him the Bert guy. That's all I remember. The British guy was after as a driver. That's what he was after. You could even
just say Christian Bale's character.
Christian Bale's character. But that's what he was after. And what was Eric Liddell after, which we'll get to in a second? He wasn't after the winning. Well, he was after something different. And this is a very important contrast that the writers do intentionally. Okay. They didn't do this on accident. They have Abraham saying, if I can't win, I won't run. And again, we have another example of men writing these movies and putting in a female character that tells the man to put your big boy pants on. But she does it in a way that is also uplifting to him. Right. In other words, she's not putting him down. She's literally lifting him up by saying, you're better than this. She's not saying, you're so immature. She's not calling him names. She's saying, you ran like a god. You did your best. I'm so proud of you. I'm not saying women don't need this too, but men, obviously, whether it's subconscious or not, we see this pattern in all these movies, is that the woman comes in and she's like, oh, I love the smell of gasoline and oil on your fingers or whatever. Like,
you're a deviant.
And those are the partners that we ideally want. We want those who are like, your dreams are important. You are very good at it. Whether you win or lose, I'm proud of you. You tried your best. I think you're great.
Well, because what's a fear? If we lose, they'll leave.
Or they won't respect us, or their respect for us and love for us is based on our achievement. And again, a man's biggest fear is a fear of failure. And so he's coming right up against it. I failed. I tried my best. I can't run any faster. I can't do better. And here he has a mentor, and we all need the mentors too. Yeah. So Abraham's needed two people to help him overcome the lie in his life, which was that his life was all about achievement and proving himself in some sort of outward way. And if he didn't have Sybil and if he didn't have Sam, he wouldn't have won at life. Right. Not in the race, at life.
Because there's a moment towards the end where Sam says, he doesn't tell Abrams to his face, but he's in his room waiting for the results, and he calls him my son. Mm-hmm. And he passes on the charm that his father had given him. And so as you mentioned, the mentor shows up to guide him, to train him, and it's not pleasant. It's a lot of work. And he has to fight for him, because back then, amateurs don't hire professional coaches. They just run. Even hiring a coach. And by the way, the coach was half Italian and half Middle Eastern. Which, when you think about it, again, for those two to pair up,
right, was
very other.
Yeah. So they were both misfits in that sense, and in their culture, in their time, in that country. So for Abraham's, he believed a lie, and his journey is coming to grips with that, with the truth. Because, as we'll get to the end, the story is told through a third person. We haven't even talked about him yet. The story is actually narrated with Montague. What's his name? Aubrey?
Aubrey, yeah.
Montague, which is kind of letters back. And I don't know if those letters existed. I haven't done that research, but as you know, that's kind of told through like this whole letters back to his sister or somebody. So that's Abraham's character, where this is what he has to figure out. And I think there are a lot of guys who have to figure this out. I think the reason why I think there's value in this is we would all like to say that we are already like little. I think we would all love to be like, oh man, yeah, I already know who I am in Christ and I already get it. And most of us don't, right? What? Most of us.
Speak for yourself, big boy.
Most of us, the reason why this movie needed that character is that most of us relate to feeling lost when we lose. Most of us relate to feeling completely unmoored, like feeling like I did my best and it wasn't good enough. Most of us feel that. But this is also a story where we can choose a different story. We can choose a different way of thinking. And that's why I love this. One of the reasons I love this movie is because then they show that his attitude is different. It's not, if I can't win, I won't run, right? It's a weapon. I'm going to beat him with running.
I'm going to prove myself.
I'm going to prove myself. Little is not the exact opposite, but he has a completely different attitude.
Well, and I want to hit on what you just said about Abrams a little bit before we shift to look at Eric Liddell, because I think it's important for us to realize the different ways that our own inner Abrams might look, right? Where do we find our success and validation? Where is it? Is it work? And you're like, oh, if I work 60 hours this week, I get a bonus. The money you make is your validation, or the praise you get from the boss, or the fact that you're busy. Like there's a lot of people who are like, how you doing? Man, I'm so busy, as a proof that they're important. I matter because I'm busy. My schedule is full.
Yeah.
What about your kids? Do your kids behave? Do they do what you want them to? You know, because and when they don't, how does that feel? When do you feel unmoored from your identity? When do you feel your anchor is gone and you're just drifting? Like I tell my wife, when I feel the anxiety going crazy, it's like I'm on a raft in the middle of the ocean. I'm just trying to ride the waves out until they calm down and I can think again. But when you experience those feelings, don't just run off and try to run faster than them. By working harder, doing more, staying busier, you can stay ahead of it for a while, but eventually it'll catch up. Not to hammer home the running analogies. But sit with that. I was like, what's making me feel this way? What would make it feel better? It's important, just like the coaching. Sometimes you need a coach to look and say, hey, it's interesting because Abrams was overstriding.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, wait, no, taking longer strides is going to help me finish the race faster. But what it does is, because he was almost lunging forward, so he's actually, when he lands, he pushes backwards. And so by taking shorter strides, he's going to run the race faster. And I think we try to do more in an effort to be more. And what that actually causes us is to actually achieve less of what we honestly love and want to accomplish.
Yeah, I think it's a beautiful analogy and insight that you're hitting right here. Because here's something I've had to learn in my life. That I have to celebrate 1%. I have to celebrate doing something today. Because my dreams, I don't know about you, I don't know about the people who are listening to this, my dreams are bigger than I can do in a day. My dreams
no
are
shortage
bigger,
of good ideas.
right? My dreams are bigger than I can do in a week or a month or a year. My dreams are bigger. And I feel, just from my own personal testimony, that many of them are things God wants me to do.
Right.
But it can become easy to feel like I'm expending so much energy. I'm trying to do too much. And I think you mentioned it on one of the podcasts. I think it was the Kingdom of Heaven one.
Acorns.
I think it was that one where he was talking about 1%. And I've heard it too in other sort of marketing, sort of inspirational little things. It's like, just do 1%. Get up early and do 1%.
C.S. Lewis calls it the compound interest of, I can't remember what it's of, but it's basically if you do 1% every day, the compound interest over a week, a year, a lifetime is going to reap enormous benefits.
Right. And so,
or not if you go 1% worse.
That's a good point. But here's Sam Musabini. He's saying you're expending too much energy in every stride that you're taking. But you need to shorten those things, and you will actually run the race faster. And I will find you those 2 yards. Like when you think about it, 2 yards, it seems like it's not a lot. 6 feet. But
on a 100-meter dash.
On a 100-meter dash, when you're
pretty
a
close
step
to
or
1%.
two behind, right? When you're a step or two behind,
right,
then that can make all the difference between gold medal or bronze or not even placing, right?
Right.
And so that's why we need mentors. We need mentors to sit us down and go, hey, it's okay. Take a weekend off or whatever. We need people who are like, look, there's some things in life that are more important. And here's how you focus and here's what you do. And we need the support system like Sybil is. Of course, they put it in a very romantic sort of setting, but her character is very interesting. I don't know if they would have a character like her in modern movies because she kind of plays the, what do I do? Oh, woe is me kind of character a little bit. And she's told like, look, he has to work this out. And she literally says, you got to go work this out. And I support you. You need to go work this out. You need to go get this out of your system, do whatever you need to do. I support this. I'll be here. And that's a very difficult thing to do. That's a sort of love that's difficult to do with some people, but we need people like that who are like, look, go take some time. He had someone that was supporting him and on an emotional level, and he had someone that was mentoring him with practical, very useful value to kind of move forward. And we need those people. And I think Little had already had those people. Like by the time we see him in this movie, he's had them too, right? He's had those people, and he's come to a place of faith and belief where he's willing to give his life for something. And it's not running, but that allows him to have a very healthy attitude, like we talked about in the last podcast, towards and in the Ford versus Ferrari, a very healthy attitude towards his excellence and his dream.
And so the movie shifts from Abraham questioning himself in the loss to then Jenny, who's his sister, she's questioning his commitment to the ministry.
Training. All I ever hear is training. Do you believe in what we're doing here or not?
Look, Jenny, I'm sorry. I was late. I apologize.
That's all very well, Eric.
Look, I said I was sorry.
To me, it's not me you've insulted.
Wait will you bother? The Lord will not feel slighted at the missing of a bus.
Yes, Eric, you missed a bus, but why? Your mind's not with us anymore, son. It's full of running and starting and medals and pace. Your head's so full of running, you've no room for standing still.
Jenny. Don't fret yourself.
I do fret myself, Eric. I'm frightened for you. I'm frightened for what it all might do to you.
Come on, Jenny, let's go for a walk. I've got something to say. I've decided. I'm going back to China. The missionary service have accepted me.
Oh, I'm so pleased.
But I've got a lot of running to do first. Jenny, you've got to understand. I believe that God made me for a purpose. For China. But he also made me fast. And when I run, I feel his pleasure. To give it up would be to hold him in contempt. You were right. It's not just fun. To win is to honor him.
When I run, I feel his pleasure.
Yeah, my favorite line.
Like he tells Jenny, I'm going to go to China, but I've got something I have to do first. And you might not agree with me, but I'm not answerable to you. Right?
Good.
God doesn't care if I miss the bus. It's like just because you have your expectations and your plans for how I should follow God, I'm following God. And sometimes I have to stand up to someone who thinks I should be doing something different. And again, he's going to be doing that here in another couple scenes of saying, oh, the heat's on Sunday. I'm not going to run on Sunday.
One of the things I love about that scene is they're talking in front of somebody else, their brother, maybe. There's somebody else in the room. And
the janitor.
Somebody else in the room.
Chairs.
And he's like, I'm going to have to talk to her. But he's intimate with her. And he pulls her. He said, let's go take a walk. I'm not going to do this in front of everybody. I'm not going to do this in front of people.
Oh man! And they climb a hill and they're overlooking.
And they climb it, and
some
he stops,
Scottish town that's just gorgeous,
right? And and that's important because he stops and he goes, like he appreciates it. He goes, look at that, and she just glances and keeps walking. Like he's taking stock of the beauty. I'm going to miss this town. I want to enjoy this while I have it. I want to enjoy this. I want to experience this. And me enjoying the town of Scotland or a sunset or running, me enjoying those things is not against ministry. In fact, it might actually help me in ministry. And we see that little interchange he has with the boy because they're coming out of church and the kid's playing, rugby or football or whatever it is. And he catches the kid and he says, hey, do you really think you should be playing sports on a Sunday? And he goes, no, or whatever. He goes, I'll tell you what time do you get up? I'll play with you. Again, he was a rugby star or whatever. Right. He was a star.
National. Yeah.
So he's like, he was going to take his time with a little kid to show him that God's not a spoil sport. Yeah. That's what he said. I don't want him to think, I want him to find joy in life. There's nothing there's nothing wrong with football. I'm not going to try to put that down. It's just where do things go? Where do things belong? What's God's design? And this is what he had to deal with. This was his conflict, even though I don't think he believed a lie, but this was the conflict he had to deal with. He had to deal with people saying, this is not what ministry looks like. We have this idea of what ministry looks like and the choices that you're going to have to make. And he says, look, when I run, I feel his pleasure and I honor him when I do it. And if I don't run, I dishonor him because he's given me this talent and I get to use it. Because of this talent, he gets to travel to places and preach at different churches. And he uses his fame, for lack of a better term, his influence for the gospel. He uses it. And we didn't play the clip, but it's a beautiful little sermon earlier in the movie where he runs and then he gets up there and it's in the rain and everybody's listening to him. And he says, look, we just enjoyed a race, but this race was temporary. And this is the Britt Mooney summary of it. But the summary of it is basically he says, look, there's another race. There's a higher race. There's a more eternal race that God wants you to be a part of. And he calls them to something higher. He uses what's temporary and calls them to something more eternal. And so my point is that God is so creative. Right? That sometimes the church is like, well, it didn't happen in the church building, or it didn't happen on Sunday, or it didn't happen from 10:30 to 12, or it didn't happen within these confines of what we think ministry looks like. And he was just enjoying. He had come to a place with his own identity that he could win, he could lose. But whatever happened, his goal was not to win or lose. His goal was to feel God's pleasure. And his goal was to honor God. And I'm just telling you, that is an amazing reality. But again, you have to get there. Like you have to go through the Abrams, I think. You have to go through the Abrams struggle to get to where little is at the beginning. And so and what he has to do moving forward.
That's actually where we'll go next, is looking back at Abrams. because they go to the Olympics. The preliminary heat for the 100, which is the race that both Little and Abrams ran, was on Sunday. And so he said, I'm not going to race. I'm not going to run on Sunday. I believe that's my belief. I'm not going to do it. And I think it's interesting because we think, I'm not going to run, but I'll watch it or something. No, he goes and preaches. He goes and ministers to God's people. And he talks from Isaiah 40 about how nations rise and fall, but those that wait on the Lord will renew their strength. They'll rise up on wings like eagles. So
he was in the Inquisition with they try to pressure him.
Yeah.
And they're making all these arguments about how to change his mind. And he looks at them because they're like, but this is your country and this is your king and your prince. And like, it's an intimidating moment.
Right. Because you have the next king of England sitting in the room.
I don't know if people realize how intimidating that would have been to someone from Scotland who wasn't even, but like, look, I'm your prince. I'm the Prince of Wales and I'm the next king and we need you to do this. And he says, God makes kings. Yeah. And God makes kingdoms, and I'm going to do what he tells me to do. And I was like, but again, it's only someone who has that identity secure, someone who's secure in that identity, which again, he has shown throughout the whole movie. And he realizes, by the way, he has to be a person of integrity. So he can't be the guy who told the kid, you can't play football on Sunday. That's not honoring God. Right. He can't be that guy and stand up in front of people and preach. He can't be a person of integrity and run this race, even if it means sacrificing the last 4 to 6 or whatever years it's been that he's been training, and he doesn't want to do it and it hurts and he regrets it, which he later tells Sandy, but no doubts. I don't doubt that what I did, I regret it. I mean, this had been his focus, but because that wasn't his first priority, he had first sought the kingdom. Right. He had done that because that hadn't been his first priority. He was able to sacrifice this for what was good and right and true. So during that Inquisition meeting, Lindsay, who had already won a race and won silver, I guess he got a silver medal. He's like, foo, Lord. And he goes, look, what if I give him my spot? He comes up with a solution, which is what happens, which is when he preaches on Sunday, instead of going to the heat, he's literally telling them what happened in that meeting was he stood for what was right and God made a way. And that's what he was preaching in that a Scottish church in France. But anyway, so then at the end of the Inquisition, a couple of the guys kind of go off to the side and have this little side conversation.
Steady moment, George. Thank God for Lindsay. I thought the lad had us beaten.
He did have us beaten, Effie. And thank God he did.
I don't quite follow you.
Well, the lad, as you call him, is a true man of principle and a true athlete. His speed is a mere extension of his life, its force. We sought to sever his running from himself.
For his country's sake, yes.
No sake is worth that, Effie. Least of all, a guilty national pride.
I love that. His speed was an extension of his life. And if you cut it off, you cut him off from the source. If you break his conscience, you're going to slow him down.
This is who he is. Right. And Little says something in the meeting that I thought was amazing. I love this line because they're saying, who are you, sir? How dare you? You're so arrogant. Right? Yeah. That you would refuse us, that you would call this an inquisition, that you would stand up and say no. Like, how dare you? And they call him arrogant. And he says, my arrogance extends as far as my conscience demands. And here's the thing. You will look arrogant in front of people when you stand up for what you believe. You will. People will call you names. People will try to weasel you into stuff. And that's the conflict that Little had to go through. You can't be a real man of God and do this and stand up for this. And wouldn't someone who loves his country do this? And I know I do love my country. And I wish I could do this, but I can't. And they call him arrogant. But I love the line, my arrogance extends as far as my conscience demands. And there is something that we have to learn in the church sometimes. We have to be careful with people's consciences. we have to be careful with that. If they have a belief about something, especially on something that, you know what, it's not a life or death issue, you know, like whether they eat meat or not, or pork or not, or drink a beer or not, or like, there's some things that we can just kind of give some liberty. Then we have to be careful because, but also we have to realize once we know our identity that there will come times that it will be challenged, and we'll have to be people of integrity, and we will have to make sacrifices, and the sacrifice for that conscience and for what God has told us to do, it might cost us something. But I love that part of the movie is that it wasn't like he got to do everything he ever wanted. Like, right. He literally had to say no, and there were consequences for his integrity. And I love that.
It brings back that headmaster speech full circle, where he says, look for see where your true chance of greatness lies, seize it, and let no power or persuasion keep you from it.
That's so good.
For Abrams, it was running, and that was how he was going to achieve greatness. It was running as fast as he can. Do you remember? No swifter man in the kingdom. But for Eric, it was following God and doing as God asked, because it was God's gifts that it was running at all.
So good.
And so his let no power, persuasion, dissuade, it's like, this is what I have to do. And you're asking me to go against what I believe?
Yeah.
And he held on to that. And so then he ended up running the 400, which, by the way, 4 times longer than the 100. Quick math. And he wins. And as you mentioned, as he's sort of entering that final kick and his arms are all akimbo and his head kicks back and he's got the big smile on his face and he collapses exhausted, he runs to glorify God. And that's his goal. It's not to glorify himself or to prove anything. It's just to experience God's smile on him, which we all have those opportunities.
Yeah.
There are things that we can do that God smiles on us.
Yeah.
And they might not make much sense, and they might make people mad, but we experience joy and pleasure. And to shift into our last conversation, contentment. Because we find contentment, like, it's fine. Eric's fine if he doesn't run. Yeah, I want to run if they switch the race, but you didn't, so I'm good. Like, he's not pitching a fit. He's just like, this is who I am.
Yeah.
And otherwise, we're good. And now we're going to switch over to Harold Abrams. He's one of the, honestly, a weird scene, because he's laying there on the massage table. Sam's giving him a rub down, and he's talking to his friend Aubrey, who we haven't talked about that much. He's sort of he's the narrator, the observer, the storyteller, at least from Abrams' perspective. And he's talking to Aubrey and being really vulnerable for the first time, because he's lost the 100. He's lost the 200, and he didn't make it. And so he's getting ready to run the 100 final, and he's telling him he's scared.
Do you remember when we first bumped into each other, old man? We shared a taxi, remember? You made me feel an age-old, burdened, sour, even superior. That was the miscalculation of my life. You, Aubrey, are my most complete man. You're brave, compassionate, kind, a content man. That's your secret. Contentment. I'm 24 and I've never known it. I'm forever in pursuit, and I don't even know what it is I'm chasing. Aubrey, old chap, I'm scared. Sam and I, we've labored, rowed, and bullied for this. Day in, day out. You've seen us. Chuckled over us, I'll be bound. Out in all weathers. Madmen. And for what? I was beaten out of sight in the 200. And that paddock tricked me in the semi. Now, in 1 hour's time, I'll be out there again. I'll raise my eyes and look down that corridor, 4 feet wide, with 10 lonely seconds to justify my whole existence. But will I? Aubrey, I've known the fear of losing. But now I'm almost too frightened to win.
All right, maybe we should have played this clip first and just talked about this one the whole time.
Right?
So, all right, first piece. I want to talk about Aubrey, you're the complete man. You're brave, you're compassionate, you're kind, you're content. And I don't know, when he said contentment, it reminded me of the Bible. Because Paul talks about in Philippians 4, right? I've been in plenty, I've been in want. I've been hungry, I've been fed. I've been in cold, I've been hot, I've been to this and that. And I've learned to be content in all things. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Hey, all things is be content.
So I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me was the first verse I ever memorized as a young child. I thought it meant I could fly. I thought it meant because I
believe I could fly.
I love superheroes. And so I was like, yeah, I can lift big cars and I can, but in context, what he's saying is I can endure every circumstance with contentment through Christ. And that's what Little does. And that's what he sees in, of course, he's not close to Little in the movie.
Right.
Like they're not friends. He's a competitor, but he doesn't hate him. But he and Aubrey have become really close. And he's looking back at his time with Aubrey. And he's like, you've already won. You're content.
I look down on you and now I want to be like you.
Now I see you're the one who's got the treasure. And man, that line where he says, I have 10 seconds to justify my existence. And even though it's a line written, I don't think he really ever said that, but it's a line written for a movie, but it's such an insightful line. It's such a deep line about the heart of many men and their fear of failure and their fear of working hard and achieving things and what's going to happen. And then he goes, but I'm even more scared. Even if I win, will I get it? Will I get what I've been looking for? And so I think that whole monologue is extremely telling, but it's really cool because Sam doesn't say anything, because it's after that Sam sends him a letter.
Yeah.
That calls him son. It's after that Sam actually dignifies him and shows some emotion with him. And Aubrey doesn't say
Aubrey
anything.
just sits there super, like I said, it's an odd scene.
Yeah.
But the other piece that I think goes back to what we talked about it with Weight of Gold is it's one thing to lose, but what if I win and it doesn't change anything? What if I win and I'm still empty? What if I win and I'm still untethered? I'm still uncontent, discontent. What if I win and I'm not content? And I think that's his fear is if I achieve my dream, what if my dream doesn't complete me? What if I win, but I'm still not enough? And that's the fear of, I guess, success, right? Sometimes losing feels better than being asked to succeed or being asked to, as we talk about, your dreams coming true or, hey, I've always wanted that job. And then you take it and you feel underqualified and overwhelmed and have no idea what you're doing. And like, I wish I was back in the mailroom because at least I felt comfortable there.
Yeah. At least you could pretend that if I had this, I would be happy. And then you have it and you're not.
Right. Because unless you find contentment, you're not going to be happy anywhere.
Yep.
It's not your externals. It's your internals.
Yep.
Your external can't drive who you are because it'll never be enough.
But if you can find that contentment within, then you can live your life in a way where you get to enjoy the externals for what they really are. And that's what Little shows us. He was able to be emotionally honest. And see, and that's what knowing our security is in something beyond ourselves. And in something that's unchangeable, that's what it does for us. It allows us to be both happy and sad at the same time. If I have my identity in Christ, which is unshakable, unchangeable, and full of abundance and wealth. And I can never lose this. When I have that, that means I can actually be happy and sad at the same time, and I can be honest about it. The Bible says two things about Jesus, and it says a lot of these sort of things, but it says that he was anointed with joy above all his brethren. And he was anointed with joy above everybody else. He had more joy than anybody, basically. That's what that means. But also said he was a man of sorrows, acquainted with grief. He was both. It wasn't like he was sad one day and happy the next. He was both. He was someone who could endure, who could enter into your sorrow and enter into your joy. Like both coexisted within him. It's a very mature thing to understand. Like this is not easy to understand, because a lot of times we think, well, if I'm happy, then I can't be sad because that lessens the happiness. Or if I'm sad, I can't be happy. Like people in grief deal with this all the time. Like if I'm happy, then what does that say about how much I loved my husband or my wife or my dad or somebody who passed away? Like I have to be sad all the time because that proves I love them, and they can't be happy, right? And there's these sort of like lies that go around about all this stuff, because again, we have to find our identity in something that's beyond the situation, that's beyond the temporary. And just as we kind of close out this thing, like just I have a couple of encouragements. Number one, find people who will be honest with you and help to lead you into that place of understanding your identity. If you don't already yet, find a community, because Abraham's didn't do it alone. He did it in community. You're not going to get this alone. Paul didn't get this alone. Paul, who writes Philippians 4, he didn't get there by himself. He had, when he, the scales fell from his eyes, and then he went to wherever he went, to Antioch or whatever, and he was with Barnabas there, and he was with Silas and Timothy, and he had a community around him. Like it was 14 years later that God called him to be a missionary somewhere else. Like he had mentorship. He had people who Barnabas had been there when the Holy Spirit came down on the day of Pentecost, right? Like these people were able to mentor him. And so Paul didn't get there without a community. Jesus didn't get there without a community. He had people around himself. When he went up to the mountain, there were times he was alone, but when he went up to the mountain to be transfigured, he took a couple guys with him. And all that to say is to find a community. It doesn't have to be a big one, but find a community that will be honest and can help to guide and hold accountable and encourage us to that true identity. And then once we do have that identity, or even in the process, because I don't know that any of us have ever, we're not perfect, but what is the thing that you do and you feel God's so happy when I do this? I feel God's pleasure. Is it being an electrician? Is it doing the yard work? It can be a lot of different things, but if we have the image of God, we have been created with the image of God. We were created to be creative with something. And I don't know what that is. It's different for every person. You can be creative with decorating.
What's yours?
With me? Oh, no. Writing. I write a scene, or when I write a story that I feel has some sort of emotional, universal connection with people. When people say, man, I cried in that scene when I read that or whatever. And I say, well, that's good, because I cried when I wrote it. But for me, it changed not my whole life, but it changed a big part of my life when I realized I can't control getting published. I can't control selling books. But what I can control is when I get to the end of the story, I can ask God, is this what you wanted it to be? Did I say something real? Did I say something? Did I communicate something? And what did I put in this that has eternal value? And when I can do that, when I can say that, I've already won. And now I can be happy about sharing it, right? And be like, look, it's not about me. It's about this. And it's about something God gave me. Because if I start to find value in how many people show up on Sunday morning, if I start to find value in how much money people give at the church, you know what I mean? If I start finding my value in these sort of elements, then I will go down a very dark path very quickly. I'll get discouraged. And you know what I mean? And my wife is one of those people who, when I do get discouraged, she is like this woman. She's like Sybil. She's like, wait a minute, what about this? And what about that? And what about this? Look what you did here. Like, do you see? Like, she has to remind me, like, look at how far you've come. Look at all these things. And I'm glad I have somebody like that. And she's not the only one. I have friends like you and other people who encourage me in my walk.
Well, and I think that's a pretty good goal and a note to end on is, when you get to the end of the story that we're writing, the story that we're living every day, we get to the end of the day and we can say, God, did I tell the story that you wanted me to tell? And if the answer is yes, then that's a pretty successful day. And it's not going to all look like gold medals and ticker tape parades. And it might look like helping your in-laws into the car. Amen. Or just stopping by when God said, hey, stop there, or even just loving your kids as they're telling you about a party they're going to. There's things that we're all called to do, something that makes God smile, that brings us his pleasure, that his pleasure shines on us.
This doesn't have to be your job that you get paid money for, but you will have to set aside margin in your life to do it. You will have to be intentional, because I guarantee you the devil will try to take it away from you. If you feel God's pleasure in it, the devil will try to give you excuses why you shouldn't do it. That's just my last encouragement, is that even if it's 1%, even if it's 10 minutes or something, like, invest in those things that you know, man, you're not doing it for money. You're not doing it for any other reason other than, I know God's happy when I do this.
So I hope you enjoyed this episode of the Men at the Movies podcast. Paul McDonald and Britt Mooney talking about Chariots of Fire. Dun, 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 dun. Check out our website, menatthemovies.com/podcast, where we'll have links to the different shows or stuff that we talk about, or quotes that Paul may have misquoted. And we'll actually have the full, or even the verses, we'll have the references and stuff. And we'll also have questions, so you can sit around with some of those close friends of yours and say, hey, what do you think of this? You can watch the movie and then talk about it, if you're into that sort of thing. So that's going to wrap it up for this week. And I hope you join us next time here on the Men at the Movies podcast.
Something inside has been awakened. I can no longer be who I was before. But if I am no longer who I was, who am I to be?